It's just like, here's the dry food, here's the canned food. It's backed by science, which is always a red flag. Because it's become a marketing point, right? It's like, what does that mean? They tell you, they put a picture of a rotisserie chicken.
Oh my gosh, look at that rotisserie chicken,
right? And that's supposed to somehow be the same thing as like a little pellet that's brown, and it's just like, oh yeah, that rotisserie chicken is the same thing as this pellet. The whole thing is bonkers. What's up, everybody? It's Chicago talk show host, and in this video I will be talking about the veterinary industry. We're a business first, an animal hospital second. So those are the words spoken to me by an integrative doctor that I used to work for in the city during my last years as a veterinary technician. So I racked up about 10 years of experience as a veterinary technician in the Chicagoland area, ranging from big box national chain pet hospitals that you'll find at a pet store, Western style private practices, emergency care, and lastly, integrative/holistic care. That being said, I'm familiar with the customer journey of someone who just adopted or got a new pet and encountering the machine of services, picking a doctor, a veterinarian, the services they provide, and a lot of it is a jungle. And a lot of it actually reminds me of going to the mechanic with your car. Unless you are a mechanic and you know what a thing or two about cars, chances are you're just going to have to follow on the word of the mechanic that you're working with, to trust him that what you're saying and what he's doing is going to help your car in your situation. And like so many of us, if you don't know anything about cars or your information is limited, then you're lacking that level of knowledge, that critical level of knowledge. And so basically it comes down to, a lot of this is, you don't know what you don't know. This is what it makes me think of. So this is why I started and created this series, what I call the Veterinary Industry Machine. And with this first introduction video, because I know there's a lot I could talk about, and I'm doing this because I know a lot of you followed me on X and a lot of you followed me on YouTube, so I can talk to you about my veterinary technician experience and share with you the knowledge I've learned, some of the knowledge I've learned, the things I've seen, the people, and just basically the inside workings of what it all looks like when behind those doors, right? When we take your pet into the back. I wanted to give you an insight, and if you can learn something from it, that would be great. But I do want to stress that I am not a veterinarian, and none of this is veterinary medical advice. So topic number one is going to be probably one of the most important topics when it comes to veterinary medicine, and that is food. And I got to tell you that what I learned while working at commercialized Western style approaches, where it's just basically about sell, is radically different from what I learned in my later years, my last years as a veterinary technician while working at an integrative veterinary practice. So when it comes to food, right, dry food, what I'm here to tell you is, what I've learned is that a cat or a dog, they can live off of dry food. Shocking, right? But the difference that the integrative veterinarians would appeal to is that if you were to feed your cat or dog a species appropriate diet, that it would not only save you money in veterinary medical bills in the long run, but it would be vastly much more superior in health quality for your cat or dog. That was a critical difference. However, be that as it may, it was expensive. What their alternative to dry food, to canned food, could get really expensive. And there was a huge turnoff for a lot of people, which a lot of the demographics were, yeah, we had single people that would come in, but at the end of the day, a lot of our business was families. And there's only so much money, unless you're super rich or whatever, then it's no problem. But for so many families that could barely afford treatment for their pet or whatever, hey, it just is what it is. if the dog's able, or the cat and their dog is able to live off of the dry food, then they'll just do that. So the dry food. So while working at the integrative veterinary facility, I got to learn some things. So, and part of the appeal was they would be pragmatic about the whole thing, be sensible. So they would often tell about the history of dry food, and they would say things like to clients, with dry food, how did that start, right? Because they were looking at it at an angle from, what is a dog? What is a cat? And because they were created, what were they designed to eat, right? Because it's not like, cats and dogs came out of existence after being created by God. And next thing you know, there was dry food at the corner to just feed them that. No, what did they eat? So let's talk about it. And that's what they would talk about it to the clients. So dogs are scavengers, right? So they would eat things that maybe that they would find out in the wild. And if we're talking about a wild dog here, they would say things like, if there was like a roadkill that'd been there for a hot little minute, and there was still a little something that was relatively fresh, maybe that dog will come on over and eat whatever is there. And chances are that dog should be able to tolerate it because of the way it was designed and the way what's going on in their gut. And that was a huge deal. The gut, right? The stomach. We're talking about the digestive process, right? That was a huge deal. And a lot of the things that they would get concerned about with dry food are things like the processing, the high level of processing. They were concerned with temperatures, the high temperature process to get them into the kibble that they said that would lead to a couple of byproducts that would turn out to be carcinogens. So they were worried about that. And they would worry about the ingredients that would make up the actual dry food. And they got concerned with a lot of it being filler, a lot of these ingredients being just things like sawdust, nutritionally devoid of nutrition. I'll put it that way. It seems like they weren't totally lacking in nutrition, but they would pale in comparison to what they would recommend. So with the dry foods, they also pay attention to how did that thing become a thing? Dry food. How did we as American families start doing it? And they would bring up the fact that back in the day, people would what would they feed their dogs before highly processed dry food? They would feed them table scraps, right? They would have table scraps. They would have, whatever the dog would find in the backyard. That's what the dog would eat. And the dog was fine with it. The dog did well on it. Now, here comes the marketing stuff. Here comes the money to be made. Here comes the industry. What's a cheap thing that we can manufacture for these dogs that we could sell to these people, right? There's a buck to be made. And slowly but surely, the advent of dry food became a thing. Now, also that became a thing was the canned food. Canned food was a huge thing too. Now, the canned food back in the 50s was way different compared to what we have now. There's still a level of process involved with canned foods that would worry the doctors, particularly with things like the carrageenan. I think, if I recall correctly, carrageenan was something that they would put in the canned food so that way the food doesn't stick to the can. But it turns out carrageenan wasn't the best thing for the gut. And so you would see digestive issues that may or may not be related to that sort of thing. These digestive issues are incredibly difficult. They're incredibly comprehensive. There's a lot of trial and error to figure stuff out. And you might think to yourself, well, what's the big deal? It's just food, right? But food, of course, I know it's going to be shocking. It's the basis of health. And we would see all kinds of problems ranging from skin, allergy issues, eye issues, ocular issues, hearing issues, auditory issues. We would see GI issues up the wazoo, vomiting, diarrhea, can't handle this food, can't handle that food. Dog can't eat chicken, dry food. They gotta only eat venison, dry food. We would see things like overweight dogs. And that wasn't always just limited to the dry food. It was because there was it would be a deadly combination of lack of exercise, and then you're feeding them this poor diet. And we would see, again, a lot of musculature, a lot of skeletal issues as well. And one of the things that would be consistently concerning to them would also be the lack of moisture being essential to digestion. And that's something that I learned when I was working at the integrative vet. And So no wonder we would see all kinds of GI issues, gastrointestinal issues from cats and dogs coming in eating dry food. And it's just like, oh, wait a minute. Well, they're eating a bunch of dry food. So one doctor would say that it's kind of like the equivalent of you eating a bunch of cereal without milk, but this is all you're eating. You're probably going to feel terrible after a while. And this was no exception with the dogs and the cats that we would see, all kinds of problems. And before I move on, I also want to mention these weren't limited to just anatomy as far as the dry food when the cat or dog would eat the dry food. We're talking cognitive as well. So the doctors would see neurological issues start to happen as a result of all this dry food. And they saw a lot of it, like for example, with some of the smaller breed dogs that would develop these weird just loops in their head, right? And a lot of the doctors, they would attribute, the integrative doctors would attribute it to the sugar that's in the dry food, which is crazy, right? It's like, what's all this sugar doing in this dry food? Because it gives the impression that these companies are trying to addict your dog to this product as well, which probably is not unheard of. But they would see these neurological concerns, and that was coming from the food too, it seemed. And so that was a huge deal as well. So I actually realized I have a lot more to say to this than I thought. So we're just going to keep this video to just one topic. So I'm going to keep talking about food, and in a future video I'll talk about other topics like vaccines. So that being said, make sure you subscribe. Now I want to talk about cats and dry food. Some basic things. So cats, love the cats, right? But the thing is, cats are obligate carnivores. So what does that mean? That means that they have to eat meat. So when we were designed and God created the animals as well, it's not like, again, Adam and Eve were able to go to the store and pick up dry food for their cat, right? So what did the cat eat? So cats were designed to eat this meat, and this is going to shock you, but turns out cats were designed to tolerate eating mice pretty dang well. And it turns out that the mice, the body, when it gets consumed, has exactly what the cat needs for its health. We're talking about its micronutrients, its macronutrients, and they get that from all of the mouse. The hair, the blood, the organs, all of that, right? And so these things all matter. And it's also critically important, particularly for cats, that they get moisture in their diet, because again, it's so helpful for aiding digestion, but it's more prominent, it's more consequential for cats because cats and GI systems are such a delicate thing. And if anybody who's had a cat with GI issues can tell you that that can be a frustrating and a challenging experience, and not only that, but a costly one. I suppose the same thing can be said for dogs, but cats in particular, because they're delicate, beautiful animals, right? But here's the thing. At the end of the day, you don't want to be in a position where, if you can help it, pilling your cat with medicine that tastes bad, medicine that you got to hide in other food. But then cats are smart. So if you hide it in a piece of tuna, you may think, all right, I got that thing down my cat. But next thing you know, your cat, because it's smart, might get turned off by the smell of tuna because it smelled the medicine that you stuffed, that you tried to hide it in the tuna. And next thing you know, you end up with a cat that doesn't want to eat that tuna anymore. So now you got to come up with something else to feed your cat, all because you try to sneak a little medicine into it. This is the games that are played there. And it's no joke, but it is what it is. And not only that, it adds a stress component. You know, a lot of cats don't want to have a pill jammed into their mouth and forcibly taken. And so you see them start drooling because they get stressed out by it. And everybody knows that in the veterinary industry, it's no big secret that cats and stress do not mix. It's a deadly combination. And so now we're going to get into what the integrative doctors recommended for food for cats and dogs, and instead of the dry food and the canned food, and that was raw food. All right, so raw food. So yes, if you could picture with me, you know how you go to the store and you get your ground beef or whatever. So some of the raw food would look like that. So picture something like that. All right. But again, it's not the same thing as just going and getting some meat and some potatoes. It's not like that. So these raw foods would come in like these patties or something like that, or in these packages, and it would look like raw meat. But the thing is, the shtick was that they're supposed to be formulated to have what the dogs and the cats need for their health, right? The macronutrients and micronutrients. It's all supposed to be formulated and carefully designed. The raw food had a thing of preparing it that turned a lot of people off because it's raw meat, but all you do is just practice basic hygiene and wash your freaking hands when you use it. But a lot of people were turned off by that. But the number one thing that people were turned off by raw food was the price. It's just too expensive. Now, particularly with dogs. And so, what I mean by that is when we were talking about the raw food, a 10-pound Chihuahua is going to eat way less than like a Burmese mountain dog. So you take what a Chihuahua eats compared to the pounds of food that a Burmese mountain dog will eat, it's going to break the bank. Unless you're rich, that's a lot of money. And so a lot of families, because again, there was like our demographic, even single people with their dog, it's just like, yeah, it could do that, but it's just way cheaper to just feed the dog dry food. The dog's able to live, right? And then just call it a day. And I get that. And again, I think if everybody was made out of money and everybody could afford raw food, that's probably what they would feed their dog. But this is what they would tell people. Now, raw food for kitty cats, that was a little bit more amenable for the old pocketbook, because cats, not weighing nearly as big as some of these large breed dogs, right? Although some of these cats can be pretty big, but really not as expensive. But it is still more expensive than feeding your cat dry food or canned food. But again, the integrative doctors would plead to their clients that this could potentially save them veterinary bills, because maybe it'll reduce the chances of having chronic ear infections, having chronic GI problems, indigestion, dysbiosis, all kinds of GI inflammation, right? It can be so bad that some dogs need, if their diet is, and at the integrative vet, we saw a ton of that, because again, a lot of these dogs will be just fine on eating dry food. But for as many as those dogs are that are out there, and cats, there's plenty of them that do not do good on dry food, and they struggle. And you see it with these expensive, frustrating veterinary visits, where it's just like, I want the solution to this problem. It's we've been doing these diet tests and Lord forbid protein tests, right? Where some pets, they can't tolerate things like chicken or beef or whatever, and they got to switch to a novel protein like rabbit. Like, it's like, how did we get here? Well, it turns out that things like the industry of food itself is in jeopardy, as far as playing a role in possibly contributing to these adverse medical conditions from eating this dry food that we saw. And it's staggering, and it just is what it is. We also talked about people like dehydrated raw food. So those were kind of cool, but again, that was not cheap. So dehydrated food, you might have heard a brand called Stella and Chewy's. There's like these little pucks. It's all dehydrated. It's kind of easy and fun to feed it your pet that way. Add some water to it. But again, that bag, there's only obviously a finite amount of, and they're not cheap. And so that's a whole thing. At least with cats, I'm not going to say this with dogs, but at least with cats, I learned that there's better, and again, just like with anything, there's better versions of that canned food. I won't say dry food, but canned food for cats. But the thing is, those cat brands are so expensive. So I'm talking about brands like Tiki Cat, Weruva, what is that one? I Love You or something like that. Those are great brands, and it's not just the marketing. So these doctors, these veterinarians, these integrative veterinarians, they would pay attention to the source. So where is this? If there's chicken on the label, where is the chicken coming from? Because if it's the same industrial chicken that we get our food from, that can be messy. And next thing you know, we would see problems related to that, particularly that chicken protein or whatever. So it turns out, even with your dog and your cat, Where that chicken comes from matters, just like it matters with you. Did you get it from like a private, did you raise that chicken yourself? Did you get it from a privately owned farm? Or did you get it from a mass produced industry? There's going to be a difference, and you see it in the health, and that's what they were appealing to. Crazy, but there you go. That being said, I'm going to pivot a little bit towards supplements and treats because it's pretty simple. Guys, a lot of that stuff is not regulated by the FDA. So those supplements that's got a picture of a cat on it, and it's just like, oh yeah, it's a little cat food in the shape of a mouse or something, but it's really like a piece of cardboard. Not great. Not great. Again, same. The doctors worry about the processing, the sugar that's probably in those little gummy treats, and so you want to be careful with that sort of thing. You want to be smarter about that. So keep it simple. What I would do is, honestly, we would tell at the integrative vet, we would tell people to feed them real food. So what do I mean by that? So we would mean things like dehydrated duck hearts, dehydrated rabbit hearts. That's so good for cats. That's so good for them. And those little hearts give them nutrients that cats need for their own hearts. It's wild, right? But, again, but you have to find this stuff because it's not typically, you're probably not going to find that at Walmart. So you have to do some digging. You may have to go to a boutique designer food and designer supplements, right? From people who actually do care and do make quality products. And that's the issue. Those people are in the middle of a flood of companies that are just trying to take your money because they're capitalizing on your ignorance that you don't know any better. And it just is what it is, right? These integrative doctors would always appeal to, if you're going to give your cat treats or dog treats, make it natural. Make it natural. And I think a lot of this message is not going to shock the people who live that kind of lifestyle, who are keen and hip to that sort of thing, limiting all this intrusive medical stuff and trying to live it by being healthy, by eating natural foods, eating whole foods, and getting some exercise, basic things like that. It turns out that sort of thing is super important for your dog and your cat too. I know it's a little bit tricky because a lot of cats are, they spend a lot of time napping, but that exercise of like with the laser pointer and stuff like that, I mean, people may say, oh, the cat doesn't get the satisfaction of capturing the laser. Just make the cat move, because being overweight is a huge medical issue in the veterinary medicine industry for cats and dogs. Overweight pets are a huge health problem that we see, and people think it's funny and people maybe think it's cute. It's not. It's actually bad for them, and all it's gonna do is expedite health problems sooner or later, and those health problems turn into costly veterinary bills. But it just is what it is. Everybody knows of a cat or a dog that's lived for 25 years eating dry food, and more power to them. There are cases of that. If you're able to, if you can afford the raw food, it doesn't have to be every meal. Go for it. Go for it. Maybe it's 2 to 3 times a week, right? And sometimes people just did that. Maybe a little bit of canned food, a little bit of raw food, and a little bit of dry food to supplement, because hey, that's all the money that we have in the bank for that cat or dog, and it is what it is. But I always admired them because at least they were telling what I would think is the truth about this industry that so many other soulless veterinarian and veterinarian machines, they just whatever. It's just like, here's the dry food, here's the canned food. It's backed by science, which is always a red flag, because it's become a marketing point, right? It's like, what does that mean? And they tell you they put a picture of a rotisserie chicken, right? And that's supposed to somehow be the same thing as like a little pellet that's brown, and it's just like, oh yeah, that rotisserie chicken is the same thing as this pellet. The whole thing is bonkers. But this is the reality of it. I really hope that you learned some insight from this video, that you learned some of these things. Like every video, share it, comment, subscribe, and I'll keep giving you that information. Thank you so much. Peace.